Hi everybody, this is Josh Kulp. We are learning Daf Shvui. We are on Daf Yod of Masechet Gittin, and we come here to the very interesting topic of the Samaritans, which I will profess I'm not a real expert on. A friend of mine or two friends of mine have worked very hard over the last few years on a research project for Yeshiva University about the history of the Samaritans. It's a very interesting subject. I would suggest you look it up. You can probably Google it to find some information there. Who are the Samaritans? So in our Mishnah, we can see that the Samaritans are trusted for certain things. The Mishnah says any document that has on it a Samaritan witness is disqualified, but perhaps a little surprising to us, documents of divorce and documents of manumission are validated, and indeed it happens that Rabban Gamliel comes to Kfar Utnai, or they bring a get in front of him with a Samaritan witnesses, and they make it kosher. So, as I started to say, who are the Samaritans? By the time of the rabbis, the Samaritans seem to have completely separated from other Jews. The main issue with the Samaritans is that they have a different center of worship. It's in Har Grizim, Mount Grizim, which is right next to Shechem. They are usually considered to have separated largely from the other parts of the Jewish people sometime, I think, between the 8th and the 4th centuries BCE. They do most famously appear as a group in the New Testament. That's where we get the phrase, the Good Samaritan. And rabbis are constantly discussing what we can rely on them about and what we can't rely on them about. Now, let me just reiterate this. They don't seem to be intermarrying with Samaritans. They don't seem to consider them Jews, right, in the way that we consider ourselves Jews. They're a different group of Jews. However, the rabbis do recognize, as we see in the next Braita, that the Samaritans do keep certain mitzvot. Rabban Gamliel says, for instance, the matzah made by a Samaritan is permitted. Because Samaritans are assumed to not let their matzah on Pesach become chametz. And to this day, going to see the Samaritans this day are a small group, mostly in the northern part of Israel, and they still slaughter a sheep on Pesach. The thought is that they tend to keep mitzvot that are there in the Bible, and they do not have a rabbinic tradition. The prohibition of chametz is straightforward right from the Torah, and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel assumes that the Tanna Kama of that Mishnah assumes that they keep those mitzvot, and we get that continuously throughout this Braita. Rabbi Elazar says that they're not so careful about it, and the issue there is, okay, the Samaritans have matzah. Are they following all the rabbinic stringencies about preparing that matzah? That Rabbi Elazar is a little suspicious about. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says any mitzvah shichziku bo kikutim that they do observe, which is probably a lot of the mitzvot that are there in their simple meaning in the Torah, they keep them more than the Jews do, which is also a fascinating observation, that the Samaritans aren't less religious than us. They're just differently religious from us, and therefore when we're talking about things that have gone through rabbinic change in our understanding, that you have to be careful about. They're not going to be keeping them the same way that we do. But when there's something that is straightforward there in the Torah, and I assume Rabbi Shimon Gamliel would imagine that divorce law is also like that, well, they keep it better than the rest of the Jews. It's an interesting group, as I want to say, these are not like Karaites. Some people confuse them with the Karaites. Karaites separate from Jews much later on, but they're similar. There have been groups of Jews throughout Jewish history who have protested against the authority of the rabbinic tradition. The Samaritans don't originate that way. They seem to have separated before there were rabbis, but because they separated before there were rabbis, they don't keep the rabbinic tradition. Karaites don't keep the rabbinic tradition. Ethiopian Jews didn't protest against the rabbinic tradition. They just didn't know much about the rabbinic tradition, and therefore when they were sort of reunited with the Jewish people, things that were filtered down to us through the rabbis didn't make it to Ethiopia. You could say to a certain extent the Christians protested against the rabbinic tradition, although they also protested against the Torah as well, the mandate of the mitzvot in the Torah. And people might not like this, but in the early Reform movement in Germany, there was certainly I think, and continued in the early days in America, there was a strong tendency to not want to observe or to not admit to the authority of the interpretation of the rabbis. So it does put the Samaritans a little bit on a chart with other developments throughout Jewish history.